he serves District 11 and 12, so he's got a big area, and he's always been instrumental in helping us anytime we need him for something, livestock related programs. He also definitely helps us so much with our bull gain and heifer development program that he has there up on the screen. And we certainly thank him so much for that, you know, his support throughout the years in that program. And that's going to be the first topic. He's going to talk about our bull gain and heifer development program, and then bull development and heifer selection, bull development and selection, I'm sorry, and then fly control in bulls. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Pascal.
Thank you, Marco. Well, I hope everybody's doing good this morning. Everybody hear me all right? Marco, is that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I've got a microphone on around my neck, so that way it makes it sort of easy. I can lean back or get forward, whatever I need. So we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about. We're going to start with the Rio Grande Valley Beef Cattle Improvement Association, their bull gain test, and then we're going to go into those other topics. So, and Marco and Vidal or Ronnie, anybody that's on, if I make an error, let me know. In preparing for this, I did find an error in the 2019-2020 results on the heifer side, and I've got that file going out, but I had accidentally, like everything else, there's lots of eyes that go over this stuff, but even now after it's been gone, we're fixing to start the next one. I'd actually calculated the average daily gain wrong, so but we'll address that. So let's see here if I can click to the next slide here. Well, there we go. How about that? So a little bit about the history and the background. It was actually begun back in 1998, so we're fixing to start our 23rd year now. We've had previous bull gain tests in the valley. The Jim Wells County Beef Cattle Improvement Association up around Alice had a long-running bull gain test that they started back in the 50s, and they came down to Mike Rissica's, to the Real Beef Feed Yard near Lynn, and started feeding down there in the 1990s. And so when they moved back up to the upper coast, about that time, a group of county extension agents and producers, and so Larry Sidebottom, who's still with us, Beth Mercer, who moved up to Central Texas, Ben Olivetas, and some others. I don't know all of them, but now we have even new ones. But at that point in time, those were some of the critical folks 20-something years ago. Got with our county agents. Of course, a couple of them retired now, Brad Cowan and Ricky Perez. But Omar Montemayor and Vidal and Ronnie, Marco and Matthew Rodriguez are sort of still running the program. We feed both bulls and heifers. We started both bulls and heifers at about the same time, and that we did feed steers for a few years in between, but that program sort of panned off. We never seemed to get enough steers into it. As far as anybody that's in the state can actually enter animals. The bulls and heifers can be purebred or crossbred. In fact, a lot of the heifers are both. For the bulls, we have a 112-day warm-up test. So a little history about bull gain testing. The idea is not new. We had our first bull gain test in Texas back in the 1940s. Up at Balmorhea in West Texas, west of Fort Stockton, and A&M ran it, and so it's not a new concept, but the idea was to bring essentially yearling bulls into a program, feed them similarly, and measure their differences. And that was probably a pretty good concept as long as we were talking about mostly Hereford and Angus and maybe a few Brahman bulls. We didn't have as many breeds back then as we do now, and then make some comparisons based on Uh, those tests were about 140 days or longer, sometimes 160 days. But what we found that we can do a 112-day test and rank the bulls at about the same as a longer test for less expense. So we have a 112-day test. We do have a 14-day warm-up period to allow for the adjustment of these bulls in terms of their rumen function and sort of get the pecking order and the dominance sort of in these pens. So it's really 126 days, and that's the length of the program for heifers. The heifer program was originally 90 days, as I recall, but we figured that it was easier on the feed yard and the consigners to bring their heifers and bulls at the same time. These bulls are fed on a gaining ration, on a growth ration, but not a fattening ration. So Mike has got a lot of sorghum silage. So these bulls on a very high silage diet. They do have more than adequate average daily gains, and we'll show you some of those. But they don't get fat. One of the things that we do pay attention to is body condition score and fatness, because we want these bulls to be able to go out and go to work. We don't want them to have to go somewhere and then melt down a little bit and then be able to go to work. Membership in the association is $50 annually. I believe that's still correct. And there are consignment fees for each bull and heifer that's consigned to the test. So those consignment fees cover getting things done, like we have to pay for the ultrasound technician to come down, and we have to pay for ultrasound, and we pay for some other fees that go in, and they also help support the educational program. But feed and medicine bills are paid by the consigner, and either that's paid monthly or bi-monthly. But at any rate, before the bulls and heifers are picked up, they have to be paid. So that's just sort of the agreement with the feed yard. And typically, as I recall, the feed bills run around $400 to $500. Now that seems like an awful lot to develop a bull. The heifers are a little bit less expensive because they don't eat as much. But it really sort of depends on how big the bull is when he comes in. Younger bulls that don't weigh as much, don't eat as much, won't have as big a feed bill. But even in a feed yard, it's about $2.50 to $3 a day to feed a feed yard steer. So that'll kind of give you an idea in terms of looking at the bull. So if we, I'm not sure what I hit last time to make this thing go. Okay, there we go. So sort of the purpose, there's Mike's sign out there on the highway. The idea was just to provide uniform nutritional and health management to allow fair comparisons within breeds and age groups. So we do have 4 age groups, and we do break the bulls out. The bulls are fed together in an age group, but they are broken out in terms of evaluation within a breed group. So all the Cimbras bulls that are the youngest class, the calf class, they are all evaluated together. All the Beefmaster bulls that are in the senior group, they're all evaluated together. They provide uniform data collection, so all the bulls are weighed or scanned or measured all at the same time. And we provide this information to all parties, not only just the consigners, but because it's an educational activity, it's provided to all producers that are in the valley or anywhere else that would like to have this information. And then, of course, we conduct educational activities. We generally try to have at least one field day at with the sale this year, or with the bull game test. This year, the pandemic sort of messed us up, so I guess this will classify. Now the agents did put out a really nice YouTube video talking about this year's results and the sale. And I don't know what the address of that is, Ponce, but I do have your Facebook page here, and I will send a copy of these slides to Ponce, and he'll be glad to send them out to everybody that's registered for this, so you'll have that information.
I believe it's on YouTube, Dr. Joe, if they just do a search for the.
Okay, YouTube for Rio Grande Valley Bull Game Test?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is, I took some time and put together the numbers since in 1998. And so the orange line or yellow line is the bulls, the gray or light blue line is the heifers, And the dark blue line at the bottom is the number of consigners. Now, a lot of the consigners are repeat consigners. We probably had, we probably had about 50 different consigners over the years, but that's a good thing. We had a lot of repeat consigners, which means that I think, or at least I hope, they're satisfied with what we're doing, that they appreciate the project, the program, and the results, and how they are able to use it. So you can see that we started out with about 56 bulls and climbed to about 100, 130. And then we sort of had a little drought in there, and then of course the cattle cycle affects this as well. And you can see that in the drought of 11 and 12, we were down in our bull numbers, and then we had sort of a peak back in 2016, 2017 that we started climbing, and we're starting to taper off a little bit. We really probably should be feeding somewhere around 100 bulls. And I was looking at the numbers the other day, and I forgot, but we've fed a considerable numbers of bulls, probably about 1,400 or thereabouts over the years. And then the heifers are they're sort of erratic. It's a good place to feed heifers. Some years we've had a lot of heifers, and sometimes we don't. And of course, we've had some changes in breeders. So we've had some breeders, like all of us, we get a little old. We don't have as many cattle as we used to have. We're attracting new and young breeders, and that's great. But it'll take a while to have numbers. But it's sort of like classroom size. I'd rather have a classroom size that I could handle, maybe 100 bulls and maybe 100 females. That I'd rather have 300 or 400 bulls. You just don't get as much personalized attention to a lot of those bulls by us, not by the feed yard, but by us. So here's some data that's collected. Of course, we do on and off feed weights, and we actually weigh them twice. Okay, so we actually take an average of 2 days, because a bull can go out and get a drink of water. A gallon of water weighs 8 pounds, and he can drink 5 or 6 gallons of water one day and not the next. And so we average those on and off weights. We already talked about we have 112 average daily gain. We need to have birth dates with these bulls, so that we know what appropriate age group they go in, so we can calculate weight per day of age. We collect hip height, and then we convert that to a frame score. So hip heights are measured in inches at the hip, and then we convert that to a frame score. Frame scores range from 1 to 12. Typically, a lot of these bulls are right around a 6, which is more of a moderate frame, tending to be on the upper end of a bigger animal. And then we do pelvic area, so we take the internal dimensions of the cow, or the cat, or the heifer, or the bull's pelvis. So we do all these on both bulls and females. Sheath or navel score. Obviously, we do the sheath scores on the bulls and a navel score on the female. That's the flap, if you will, underneath the cow's belly, and it's related to the sheath score in bulls. So if you've got a lot of cows that have got big navels, chances are you're going to have bulls that are going to have big sheaths. And that goes from 1 to 5, both of those. 1 is very tight, 5 is very, very loose. Typically, we see a lot of 2s and 3s, even in our Bos Indicus influenced cattle. And then that pictures of Mr. Donnie Robertson. Donnie is an ultrasound technician. He's been trained and is certified. And he takes our ultrasound ribeye area, our ultrasound intramuscular fat, our 12th and 13th rib fat thickness, and our rump fat. And we report those. So the ribeye area is actually adjusted per 100 pounds of live weight. So as an animal gets bigger, and I'll show you the raw data in a minute from this year's session, as an animal gets bigger and older, his ribeye area gets bigger. And so that's really not a fair comparison. And so what we like to do is take the ribeye area and divide it by the 100 pounds of live weight. So bear with me here. And so if I have a bull that has a 15 square inch ribeye, well, you'd think that's very adequate. Well, let's say he weighs 1,500 pounds. So essentially we take 1,500 and divide it by 100, and now we have 15. So he has 15 100 pounds in him. We take that 15 that represents the number of 100 pounds in his live weight, and divide it into the 15 that represents his ribeye area in square inches. And now we have what's called ribeye area per CWT. That's what you see right there where the arrow is pointing. So now it's 1.0. So typically we like to see a bull that's at least 1.1 or higher to be considered muscular. If we were measuring carcasses, we would think that that number needs to be 1.8, but we're not measuring carcasses, we're measuring live animals. So anything over 1.1 is considered to be muscular. Intramuscular fat is measured as a percent of fat in the ribeye, and it's scanned. And typically any animal that is 4.0 or higher has enough marbling to be low choice. All right. And so if it's a 3.99, we consider it to be select. So we have young animal quality grades. The lowest is standard. Then we have select. Then we have choice. And actually choice has got low choice, average choice, and high choice in it. And then we have prime. So a 4 IMF is the same thing as an animal that would just barely be into choice, but would still be choice as a bull, okay? As a bull. And so typically what we tell people, and we know from research, that a 4.0 IMF score in a bull translates to a 5, 5.25, 5.5. So a score, score and a quarter, score and a half in steer and heifer progeny. And that's because of the impact or the influence of the male hormone testosterone. It suppresses intramuscular fat or marbling deposition. So that's the reason why we think that's important, because that's what it's all about. 20% of our cattle grade select, okay? 70% plus grade choice, about 8% grade select, grade prime, and the balance are our standards, or what we call no rolls, because we don't really grade those cattle. So, you know, choice is a deal, and right now anything that grades choice is worth about $8 more hundredweight carcass weight, okay, than if it grades select. And so, you know, that's where the market is. 12/13 rib fat thickness. What that does is that gives us an indication of yield, okay, of yield grade. We don't incorporate it in anything. I like to use it as an indicator of whether the cattle are getting too fat or not. They're not. Most of the time, these bulls body condition score about a 5 or a 6, and that means they have about a 1/4 of an inch or so of external fat, which is just about right for these young bulls. And then rump fat, this last one that we measure, is actually an indication of you know, their ability to adapt to tough environments. Rump fat was first discovered or first used in Australia. And what they found is that those cattle that had a little bit more rump fat tended to be a little bit more adapted to their environment. And for any of y'all that are older than I am, or at least my age or older, though, we used to call that breeding pad fat. Breeding pad fat. And so that would be the fat over the rump of the cow, okay? And then when a bull would mount it, we'd say that was sort of the breeding pad. But in reality, what that meant is that cow was storing some extra energy in an area that did not trap a lot of heat. So if you think about a cow's body or a bull's body, the barrel along the ribs where all the intestines and the heart and the lung and the liver are in the big stomach, that traps a lot of heat. So lots of times cows don't put a lot of fat over that area. They tend to put fat on the ends because they want to be able to dissipate heat out of the barrel or out of the gut. So that's why we use rump fat. And then in bulls, we look at scrotal circumference. All right. I take the scrotal circumference measurement, or one of the guys does. We measure that in centimeters. We like to have bulls that are 32 centimeters or higher. Sometimes we have some young bulls that are not quite there, and we do see some breed differences. Straight Brahman cattle tend to have a little bit lower scrotal circumferences. It's the function of the rate of development. rate of maturity of these bulls. And so they may not have as good, but here's my take home message in scrotal development, scrotal circumference, that let's just say 32 is the cutoff and they're a 31 or even a 30. If they pass their breeding soundness exam conducted by a veterinarian, they actually have good semen and the sperm cells have a high percentage of normal cells, and he has got great genetics, certainly might be something to consider using. But all these bulls do go through a breeding soundness exam. They're also tested for trichomoniasis fetus, which is a reproductive disease that's reportable. Okay, so it's a state issue. Any bull that is 18 months of age or older that's been around cows that changes hands has to have a negative trick test. So some of these bulls will go into a sale, and so we'll test it. So that's part of that fee that you pay. The nomination fee goes to paying for these tests. They're not cheap. Trick tests are like $50 a piece, and so and this ultrasound is about $25. And so you see, you're getting your money's worth when you're paying a $50 nomination fee for these bulls. The other thing that we do on the heifers is we do a reproductive tract score. So I do that. I score those heifers from 1 to 5. 1 is an infertile tract. A 5 is a tract of a cycling female. Most of these tracts are above 3, so 3 means that she's developmentally sound. And as you can imagine, some of the older heifers are 4s and 5s, and some of the young heifers are 3s. However, occasionally we'll find a 2. Very seldom do we find a 1. But we put that in there so that producers can sort of understand what's going on. Ponce, if we have any questions and we go along, you can interrupt me, okay? Or if you got a comment or something you want to change, or don't hesitate to tell me, okay?
Got it. Yeah, we're good.
All right, so I told you we sorted these bulls out, and last year we had Beefmasters and we had Brahman, we had Simbras and Simmentals, we had Angus and Beefmaster and probably something else. But here's the age groups that we actually sort them out to. And so this is actually the age groups that we'll use for this year. You'll just move the years back one if you wanted to consider what we did last year. So a calf is anywhere from January 1st to April 30th of 20. The junior bull is from the September 1st to the end of December. Then an intermediate was May 1st to August 31st. And then a senior was the January 1st to 2019 to May 30th. Actually, I think in our deal, Ponce, we had the 31st. So actually, there's only 30 days in April, but that's okay. So that'll kind of give you an idea of the age groups. The group wanted us to feed some senior bulls when we first started this. Bulls that old probably ought to be out breeding cows, I'll be honest with you. But the committee wanted us to feed some of those older bulls, and so, that's fine. Awards are presented within an age group and breed group. Depending on the number of bulls in the breed depends on how many awards that we give. I think 1 to 3, we give a champion in that age breed division. If it's 1 to 5, we may give a reserve. And if it's above that, I think we give a runner-up. But nonetheless, people like to know how they did in their particular group. We do have an index, and so all the cattle, all the data that we collect, we report all the data, all the actual numbers, and then what we do is we use an index to pick how the bulls performed within their age breed group. And this is what the committee asked us to do. We've changed it over the years. I think initially we had some different adjustments, but it's 30% based on average daily gain, 20% based on ribeye area per 100 pounds of body weight, 20% based on weight per day of age, 20% based on IMF or marbling score, and 10% based on scrotal circumference. Now, if you look at that, we have 50% based on growth measures, which is average daily gain and weight per day of age. Okay, we have 40% based on carcass, which is basically ribeye area and IMF. Okay. Then we have 10% based on fertility. You know, but the bulls do pass a breeding soundness exam, so we know that the bulls are fertile. But the reason why we use scrotal circumference is that we know that by selecting for increases in scrotal circumference. Now, we don't want to just select, because then we'll get a bull that has a scrotal circumference of 50, and then we have big problems. Okay? But we do want to work on these tools to sort of cull those that are extremes. So in the case of scrotal circumference, we really need to get rid of those bulls that by the time that they're 12 or 14 months of age, don't have a 32 centimeter scrotal circumference. We really don't need that. Their sexual maturity rate is too slow for most breeds. In the same way, okay, I don't need a bull that has a huge ribeye. Believe it or not, you know, we need to just think about what are the extremes that we want to select for those animals that are in the middle. Now, we don't multiply the actual numbers by those percentages. We use the ratio of the age group. And here's the reason why. Because we can get some bulls, okay, that maybe excel in only one area, and then they overwhelm the index, okay? So maybe we have a bull that has a 5-pound average daily gain, okay? And the average for that group is 3 pounds. And so we can overwhelm the index. He could be average in everything else. And so that what we try to do is use the ratios. It's not perfect, okay? But it's a fairer comparison than using the actual numbers. And we do use those ratios within an age group for the index. All right, so here's the results of the last year's test, all right? And so across the left over here, we have the group, the calf, the junior, the intermediate, the senior, then I have the heifers as a group down here at the bottom. Here's the number of head that was in each one of those age groups. Here's their age. And so you can see we had a pretty good age distribution. The groups worked, right? So these calves were essentially a year of age. These calves were just you know, 80, roughly 120 days older, 110 days older, almost 120. Okay, and then we had a group about 120. So it sort of works out that we have like a 4-month group, 3.5 to 4 month age difference between each group. And we know that growth is not linear. Okay, so growth is sort of curvilinear over time. And so we needed to break those out. All the heifers were just a little bit older than a year of age. So what we have here, this is weight per day of age. And so this is the final weight, the average of the final weight divided by the total age in days. And one thing that you'll see in these bulls is that weight per day of age tends to decline as bulls get older. And that's because the growth is starting to slow, right? It's becoming more mature. And then next is average daily gain. So this is in pounds. And one thing that you'll notice here is that there's an inverse relationship. Okay. And so you can see that we had quite a bit more average daily gain by the bigger bulls, the older bulls, than the younger bulls. Some of that is related to efficiency, and some of it's related to the fact that they just eat a lot more. But that'll kind of give you an idea. So you know, they don't gain as much as a feed yard steer. Some of these bulls up here did, but still, we're trying to just develop them slowly. I opted to put the ribeye area in here instead of the ribeye area per 100 pounds of live weight because I wanted to sort of show you that big bulls have big ribeyes, and that's the reason why we adjusted. Now, here's an interesting thing that a lot of people really don't know about the kind of cattle that we have in South Texas. In the Rio Grande Valley and in South Texas, we have a lot of Bos Indicus influenced cattle, a lot of Brahman influenced cattle, Beefmaster, Santa Gertruda, Cimbral, right? Some Brangus, some straight Brahmins, some other breeds. You look at the average percent IMF for all those bulls. Okay. Low choice, but still choice. Now, sure, we had some cattle that graded select, but we had some 5s in there too, and those cattle would have been well into choice. So I was very pleased with that. Typically, if you look at this, the ranking of a bull scanned at 365 days of age at about a year of age shouldn't change. The top 10 or the top 20 bulls that scanned at a year of age, they should be the top 10 or the top 20 bulls when they're scanned as a senior. And then the last bull trait that we looked at, or that I have here, pardon me, is scrotal circumference. And so we need to have about a 32 centimeter at about 14 months of age. So you can see that these guys did extremely well. And that scrotal circumference tends to continue to increase until around puberty, okay? And then it starts to slow down quite a bit. So all these bulls are more than adequate. I don't know that I really want a huge scrotal circumference. 42, 44 on a mature bull is plenty big. But the main thing is that we want to get it to 32 by 13, 14 months of age. Down here at the heifers, we had about 20 heifers. Their age is 376 days. Weight per day of age is 2.21. They're heifers. They don't have testosterone. They're going to grow a little bit slower. Average daily gain represented that. This was the ponce. This was the number that was wrong in the report that we sent out to the consigners, and I didn't catch it. Mea culpa. It said the average daily gain was 0.66, so I knew that that was wrong. I used a 2018 birthday instead of a 2019 birthday. Ribeye area, we don't see as much of a big ribeye area because they're heifers, and this is about right. But look at the IMF. A lack of testosterone in those heifers push those heifers well into choice. And so that's just some little bit of points in terms of interpretation of the data. We do have a mandatory online sale except for Beefmaster. Bulls ranking in the top 50% of the index in terms of breed, and here's what they have to do. They have to pass the BSC. They have to pass the trichomoniasis test. We have a disposition score. They have to pass the sheath score and obviously be structurally sound and good health. And I think that's one of us taking the scrotal circumference there. So you can kind of see this is bull's very adequate, well-shaped testicles. He's right at 40 centimeters. The sale dates for the test that starts in October, this year's test, will be in March 15th through 18th. It's online, so make sure you mark your dates down if you're looking for a good bull. Okay, so in summary, here's some information. Not really nice Beefmaster bull there that I had a picture. You know, you go to these things, we're all involved in collecting data and writing down data and pushing cattle. Very seldom do we get any good pictures. And that just happened to be one that I got. So I stuck it in there. A total of 329 consigners. I told you we probably had about 25 to maybe 40 individual consigners over the years, but lots of repeats, 1,600 bulls, 1,000 heifers, and that little jag of 142 steers over about 3 or 4 years. Cimbra, Santa Gertrudis, and Beefmaster have been the largest numbers, but we've had lots of other breeds, Brahman, Simmental, Bronby, Red Brangus, Charolais, Limousin, and Hereford. And a recent evaluation a few years ago, which this is hard to believe, but this is what came back. 100% of participants were satisfied with the program, and who said it added an average of $500 to every bull in the program. And I can tell you, working with some of the guys that are involved in the program, if we don't do something right, they'll tell us. And I don't know if Carlos is on here, but he's one of those guys that really looks at the data and helps us figure out how to do things better. So I appreciate the input of all the people that are on the committee, both the agents as well as the producers. Any questions? Are we good?
The chat looks clearer.
Okay, so let's flip over into the next. And then I'm going to assume everybody understands what a good bull looks like. So this is Beth Mercer's, one of Beth Mercer's young bulls. There's a story behind her ZZ brand there. Her husband, Joe Mercer, was a ZZ Top fan. And so that's the reason why they have their brand. Beth was one of the early participants and promoters of our bull game test with some of the others that we've already talked about. And she's moved up to Central Texas but she still produces a lot of good Cimbra cattle. And so that's one of her bulls there. And so we're going to talk a little bit about bull selection and development. You got good Cimbra breeders everywhere. I just was giving a plug in for Beth because she did a lot of good work early on, and we really appreciate it. So depending on the breed, young bulls, these young bulls, purebred bulls, can be evaluated for the genetic potential not only through a bull gain test, but a lot of breeders are sending their information to their breed registry to create what we call these expected progeny differences, or EPDs. So just think about a bull gain test that has data for average data gain or IMF. But now, instead of just having the data on the phenotype, the actual performance of the bull, we can actually get an indication of the genetic transmission of that bull in our next calf crop. That's what the EPD is. So almost all breeds, okay, have EPDs now. There may be a few breeds that don't, maybe Texas Longhorn, but all breeds, as an example, and I could stand corrected on that, all right? But all breeds are trying to work towards development of EPDs that you can use. Probably Simmental Association is probably one of the earliest. Angus probably has the most, but Hereford and Charolais and Brahma and Beefmaster and Santa Gertrudis, Cimbra, Brangus, they all have them. In fact, we got lots of them, and I'll show you some later. Young bulls just have less information on their EPDs because they are young, because they don't have progeny. So where does this information come from? Well, it comes from the performance of that young bull right there, his birth weight, his calving, his weaning weight, his yearling weight, his scrotal circumference, his ultrasound data, his height. It comes from his parents. It comes from his brothers and sisters, whether they're half sibs, sired by the same sire, or full sibs, sired by the same sire and dam. Sometimes that information may come from his sire and his maternal grandsire, because there's no records on his dam. And so what they try to do is they try to tease out the genetic differences. And now that we have the ability to test these animals for their genomics, to take a blood sample or a hair sample or a skin sample and look for genetic markers, either genetic markers that affect a trait or the actual gene that affects the trait. All right, we actually have improved what we call genomic enhanced EPDs. And so a lot of these breed associations are moving in that direction. So don't be scared of using them. If you're interested in a Cimbra bull or a Beefmaster bull or a Brahman bull or an Angus bull or whatever breed that you're interested in, go to their website. Go look at what their data has, what the average for that breed is, and then go compare that bull that you're interested in. He may be average or above or below average, or he may be above average. And so it's important to use these. Now, here's the thing. Young bulls, as I said, are going to have less information, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be used. And some of the traits that are most important, adaptability and fertility, we don't have EPDs on yet. But adaptability for cow-calf producers are important. That's why when we talk about buying bulls to be using on your property, they need to be bulls sort of from your area because they were raised in your condition. That's why we try not to get these bulls too fat in the bull gain test. Calving is important. So fertility is important. The BSE helps us a lot on that. Making sure he's fertile. That doesn't mean he's going to breed a cow. That's your job. You need to make sure that he's out there checking cows and breeding. Then calving, okay? Some of that's part of the cow, some of that's part of the calf. The cow has to be able to have the calf, but the bull can impact that greatly. And so we need to make sure he has good calving. And since most of us sell our calves at weaning, 90% of the people, cow-calf producers in the state of Texas, sell their calves at weaning in an auction barn. So the number of calves and how much they weigh are important still, okay? If you're not retaining heifers. Now, if you are going to retain heifers, you need to have a slightly different kind of bull. Adaptability, fertility, and calving are also important. But now you need to think about some way to measure milk production, okay? The ability of that bull to pass on some ability to greater weaning weight through improved milk. Not high levels, but some. So if we look at structural soil, and I'm going to assume everybody knows what a good bull looks like. So this is one of Larry Sidebottom's bulls, Santa Gertrudis bull, and you know, if you look at bulls, everybody knows what they need to be structurally correct. They need to be able to walk out on all 4 feet and legs. The hooves need to be relatively balanced. You know, the toes need to be the same size. Can't be post-legged. You know, all those kinds of things. Those are things that I think that all of us understand. And particularly if you look at bulls going through a bull gain test and a sale, or from a purebred producer sale, these cattle have already been evaluated. Yeah, there are subtle differences. But you know, I like to evaluate them. Even if I'm going to look at their EPDs, I still like to look at bulls. And so I like to look at their head, and I like to look at their mouth. I like to watch them walk on a flat level surface like you see here. When they pick up that front foot on the left side, I want to see the hind foot on the left side go in that track. That's a pretty good indication of structural correctness. I want to look at his sheath. Okay, and you can see that this guy's got a good sheath. You know, he's like a 2. All right, it's not even a 3. He's got a good set of testicles underneath him. Certainly more than adequate in terms of his muscling. And another thing I didn't put on here that I think that's important if you're looking at bulls is docility. In other words, is he gentle? They're going to run at you when you walk out there and go look at him. Yeah, he's alert. This bull's got his head up. They're taking his picture. All right. So they're shaking something at him, so he's got his head up. But when he's out there by himself or with another bull, and you walk out there, does he run at you or away from you? Does he act scared? You know, that's important because none of us are as fast as we think we are. And so docility is very, very important. If you raise your own bulls and you decide you want to keep your bulls and go in the bull business, that's perfectly fine. The problem is that sometimes it's difficult to compete with big breeders. If you're a purebred breeder, and I'll just pick on a breed because I like Brahman cattle. If I'm a Brahman, and I have 10 Brahman cows and one of them has a really nice Brahman calf, I may have a difficult time marketing that calf to his best advantage, considering the number of really good Brahman breeders that are in the Rio Grande Valley or up the coast. All right. On the other hand, if I am maybe an Akaushi breeder, and I'm only an Akaushi breeder in South Texas, I may have a really good chance of marketing some good Akaushi bulls. So, you know, you have to think about that. But regardless, before you put bulls on cows, regardless of how young they are, 14 months or so, we need to make sure that they pass the BSE. They also have, if you're going to sell those bulls or pass them on to somebody else, they change ownership, they have to have the trichomoniasis test. And then something that we always get asked about young bulls is how many cows can I put a young bull with? And so Mr. Frank Litters, was a mentor of mine for many, many, many years. He used to tell his class this. He said, you know, on young bulls like a 14-month-old or 15-month-old bull, never put him with more females than the months of age that he is. So if he passes his BSE at about 14 months, you could put him with up to about 14 cows. Now, on any given day, if you have 20 cows out there on any given day, about one of those cows is going to cycle every day. So you might have 2 cycle today and none tomorrow. But because the estrus cycle in the cow is about 21 days or so, on any given day in a group of 20 cows, about one's going to cycle. And so this young bull that you see here, or any of the others that I've shown you, he can breed 2 or 3 cows in a day if he's got good libido. Okay, he could pass his BSE and have poor libido and never breed a cow. All right, he could have a poor BSE and good libido and try to breed every cow, and you think he's out there working and he's a dud. That's why it's important to get that BSE and then to watch him for libido. You want him out there checking cows and actually breeding cows. And so he can breed 2 or 3 cows, those young bulls can, but you just need to be careful about not wearing them out. You know, he's going to get about 2/3 of the cows bred the first time through, and then hopefully he'll get the next third bred during the next cycle. He may not ever breed some of those cows, who knows? But so don't try to overuse young bulls. Up to the time they get to be about 24 months old, you can put him on 24 or 30 or 35 cows probably. But once again, if you only have one bull and you have 35 cows and he goes out, okay, and he quits working for you, then you have problems. And so at some point you have to decide, do I use a young bull and an old bull? Do I use 2 young bulls? All right, so you want to constantly think about how you want to use your bull battery. A lot of us, like me, you know, I'm using one bull. I'm taking a little bit of a risk, okay? I got less than 35 cows up there in Washington County now, and so, you know, I'm using one bull. And I know that if I'm not careful, if he goes out, I'm going to lose a calf crop. That's the reason why I have a calving season. So I know that at the end of 60 days in the fall, excuse me, in the spring, I pregnancy check those cows, and then I know if I have a problem or not. And then I do a breeding soundness exam before I put him on those cows. And that's something I do every year. Yeah, it costs me $75, but that's my insurance for having that one bull. And then the last thing I want to suggest on these bulls is look for moderate mature size. We don't need big framey cattle. And I realize that in Mexico, there's a market for big frame cattle, and that's perfectly fine. Some breeds have really 2 markets. They have a domestic market, a U.S. market that's looking for sort of a moderate size, and then they have an international market that's looking for a large frame. That's perfectly fine. But if you're in the commercial cow-calf production, okay, we don't get paid for height. Okay, the only thing that we get paid for in our calves is what's between the bottom of this animal and the top. We don't get paid for this part here, okay? And so look for more moderate framed animals. Heavy animals are fine, but more moderate framed animals. All right, let's see. Okay, so I broached this idea a minute ago about expected progeny differences, and I'm going to spend a few slides because it's an area that we haven't really worked on really hard, and I'm getting old and I'm going to retire one of these days, so I'm going to spend some time making sure that we all are sort of on the same page and that we can start using it. So basically, it's just the genetic prediction of how future progeny of an animal, in this particular case, bull, are expected to perform, okay, compared to progeny of other animals. So you're not saying how much weight is this bull going to add, or how much of, if it's a weaning weight EPD and it's plus 20, that doesn't mean that your weaning weights are going to jump 20 pounds. It means that in that breed, okay, compared to other bulls, he produces 20 pounds. You have to compare him to another bull to find out, or the breed average to determine what the difference really is. It's probably our best measure of genetic merit until we get blood tests that tell us the entire genome, sort of like they used to do on Star Trek. It's expressed in units of measure for the trait. So however you normally talk about the trait in terms of pounds or inches or centimeters or percent, that's how it's expressed. It can be positive or negative, okay? But the thing to remember is that as more information is added, it may change. Okay, it may change. Not very much. So here's all the EPD traits that are offered by all the different breed associations. There's about 35 that are listed there. And the last one down at the bottom is pulmonary arterial pressure that they use in some breeds that are raised in elevations above about 5,000 or 6,000 feet. They have problems with rupturing pulmonary arteries. And so foot claw and foot angle are some that have just recently been added. Then you can kind of see all the others that are there. There's probably only about 4 or 5 that are really important to cow-calf producers in the Rio Grande Valley. If you feed your own cattle, there's probably 3 or 4 more in there that are of value. But the problem is, how do you select for all those? How do you try to figure out, okay, if I select for this, how far do I need to go here? And if I select for this, am I hurting the second one or the third one or the fourth one? How do I put all that together? Well, breed associations are working on that for you. And this is what they've done is they've come up with some indices. So remember our Rio Grande Valley indice, our index? This is what they've done. So they basically looked at all their data and they said, okay, can we come up with some indexes? And this is for the cow side, the maternal side. So those of y'all that are considering raising your own replacements, this is what you want to consider, or that are considering producing replacements to sell to somebody else. These are the indexes you're interested in. And so the first 4 up there, I'm sorry, those are all Angus, the black ones. Okay. Then you have, so the combined actually takes beef and maternal. So I don't have beef on here. I have maternal. So what they've done, this combined index takes a terminal index and combines it with this index. It used to be just average them. Actually now it puts a little bit more on the maternal side, as I recall. Then they have, if you sell at weaning, this is yours. If you're going to create maternal females, this is if you're an Angus breeder or high percentage Angus breeder. If you're worried about the energy because of feed cost, this is it. If you're a Simmental breeder, the all-purpose index. If you're Hereford breeder and you use Hereford Angus, Hereford Brangus, this Baldy maternal index works. If you're Hereford Brahman, this is their index right here. Angus, Red Angus got your herd builder. Gelby's got the dollar cow. Beefmaster recently came out with their fertility index. Brahman came out with their dollar queen. I'm not sure where they came up with the queen, but that's their maternal index. Beefmaster also has a dollar maternal index. And then Santa Gertrudis recently came out with balance and cow-calf index. And so they include things like calving ease and weaning weight, and milk, cow size. All these have very similar numbers, very similar EPDs in them. But the difference is that the EPDs for each breed are different. And so they have similar traits, different weighting factors, just like the Rio Grande Valley Index has got different weighting factors. This is the carcass or terminal EPDs. So for those of y'all maybe selling at weaning and only interested in weaning, if you're running Angus cattle, this is it right here, dollar beef, right? This is probably the most widely used index of any in the Angus cattle, even though 90% of them are selling calves at weaning. Okay. This is dollar for traits for feeding, dollar for grid for carcass. And then of course, terminal index Simmental. I forget what the M stands for, but the TI stands for terminal index. Efficiency and feeder profit indexes for Gelby. Total selection index for Charolais, Gridmaster, Red Angus. Certified Hereford beef dollar, obviously for Hereford. Dollar T or terminal for Beefmaster. Terminal index for Brangus. Dollar bull for Brahman, and terminal index for Santa Gertrudis. So these would take in things like calving ease and weaning weight or yearling weight, size. They wouldn't worry about the calving ease on the cow side. They wouldn't worry. These are all growth traits. And if they have carcass information, then they would fit that in. Ribeye area, marbling score, they would fit those in. So they sort of take the guesswork out. And they do work. Okay, so these are all genetic trend lines. EPDs work. These carcass indexes, these indexes work. So the Angus genetic trend for birth weight, this is this orange one right here, okay? So in 1972, you can see that if we look at all across the years, certainly has increased. So, that's the thing that selection does work, okay? This is EPDs. When I first started thinking about this talk was back in the spring, and I have changed it over time. So you're not getting the same talk that I gave in the spring. but this was current sire breed averages from the Angus Association. Now, I'm not picking on the Angus, and I'm not promoting Angus. Those of y'all that know me know I like eared cattle. I like all cattle, but the Angus Association just right now, right then, had it in the easiest form to pull it together. They have the largest number of records, and so it's just easy to borrow their information for an educational purpose. So this is current sire breed averages back for spring. They run their EPDs every week, okay? So they constantly are updating their information. So it's important to pay attention to what it is that you're comparing, that you're not comparing old EPD information. So this is current sires, all right? And so they sort of have their EPDs broken out by production, maternal, carcass, and then here's those dollar values, their index values. And so this is Cavanese direct from the sire, birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, a residual average daily gain, dry matter intake, yearling height, scrotal circumference, docility, and so on. So they have all the different sires, but I'm just going to pay it. So my point is that you use current data. So here's Cavanese direct, it's 0.6, it's a +6. So how you read that means that if you used a bull that was +6, that's average for the breed, okay, that means that about 6% more of your calves would be born unassisted. Okay, that's how you read that. And that's why it's very important to look at these EPDs and understand what the definition is. So obviously these guys right here are birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, that's pounds, which means that the average was 1.2. So you use the average Angus bull, you can expect a 1.2 pound increase in birth weight compared to other Angus bulls. Okay, now when I was in college, we talked about Angus bulls as being what we used on first calf heifers. You certainly wouldn't do that now without looking at EPDs. Okay, and so let's look at, okay, so this is 2020 +6 Cavanese EPD, okay, +6, 2020 Cavanese EPD, still +6, okay? But some other numbers did change, and one number that was added was this right here, pulmonary arterial pressure. So they added a trait. So it's important to make sure that you have, and I'm going to back up one, maybe I can. Okay, so let's go over here to the dollar value. So here's dollar beef at $1.26. Okay, dollar beef is still $1.26, but now they've averaged, they have $1 combined. So remember what that is? That is dollar maternal plus dollar beef plus a weighting average. They actually take, I think, $1 maternal and multiply it by 1.2 and add it to this to get dollar combined. So my point is, pay attention to the most current data. So here's a tale of two bulls. I think I have 3 slides in this, and then we're going to move on to our fly talk. So this is actually comes out of a sale catalog, and I blocked out the numbers and the names so that nobody's embarrassed. And this is sort of what you see in a sale catalog. This sale catalog was actually from December of last year. So this is a little bit old data. But what I want is just 2 bulls. So you sort of look at them. Yep, one's got a Cavanese direct of +7. This is +13. So this bull's a little better, right? So this bull versus this bull is going to have 6% more easier calves, right? Calves, 6% more of the calves will come easier. Well, when you look at birth weight, he's a little bit heavier, right? So he's about 1.3. This guy's only 0.4. All right, well, but then I look over here, look at weaning weight. This guy's 76 pounds in weaning weight. This guy will give you another 30 or so pounds. And so that's why it's important to look at these. Now you say, well, okay, Joe, I can't really look at those 3 numbers. How do I value those? Well, let's look at how we might value them. So remember, I told you about the index values. And so let's look at, I have marbling here. Okay, I apologize. So if we look at marbling, and this is what the Angus guys are all about, right? So we look at marbling, this guy's marbling score here versus here is about 3/4 of a marbling score higher. So what this means is that this guy will add almost a full marbling score. This guy will add about 1.5 a little bit more than 1.5 marbling scores. So if all your cows are very high select, and you use this bull, very good chance that those half-blood calves will move them all in the choice, low choice. If you use this guy on those same cows, you may move all those calves into average choice. And you say, so what? Well, if you're marketing carcasses, okay, if you're marketing carcasses, that's about a $20 difference per carcass. Okay. But what I really want to point out is just some other differences that you see is right here. So instead of having to think about, oh, how much weight do I put on this trait versus that trait? The real numbers are over here. If you're looking at how much more money one calf will produce than the other, this guy will produce almost $50 more. When his calves will produce almost $50 more than the others. So that's how these indexes work. EPDs are great. The genomic enhanced EPDs are great. But now that many of these breeds, and I showed you all of them, have these index values, that's the way. Select bulls on phenotype, pick the breed that you like, pick the bull that you like, but then ask for his records, his EPDs. If he's a registered bull, he'll have should have EPDs. And use that to help you decide between two bulls that are pretty close in terms of what you're interested in, or 3 or 4 bulls. And if a bull's got an index value, pick the index that fits you. You sell all your calves at weaning, one of those terminal indexes is of interest. If you're selling your heifer calves and retaining heifer calves, then the maternal index is important. It'll hurt you a little bit on the male calves, but it depends on where you get the biggest bang for your buck. Okay. Questions?
Nothing on the chat.
Either they're asleep or they're drinking coffee like I am.
Hopefully drinking coffee. Before we move on, I just real quick wanted to go back to the bull gain test. If anybody is interested in entering some bulls or heifers, RSVP deadline to do that is Friday, October 2nd. And they can call either the Cameron or Hidalgo County office, Hidalgo County 383-1026, or the Cameron County office 361-8236. And actually the Willacy County and Starr County office as well. If anybody's interested, and the delivery date of the bulls will be October 7th at the Real Beef feedlot. So just wanted to touch on that before we move on. But I don't see any questions on the chat, so I guess we're good to go.
Okay, so we just have a few slides here because we're really going to talk about fly, and I don't want to intrude too much on our fever tick talk. So I was really supposed to talk. I'm going to talk about flies, but I wanted to throw a couple things up here for you. This is a really good publication that was put together by Dr. Vanessa by Dr. Sonia Swigert. Dr. Swigert is a veterinary entomologist that works for us. She is in Vernon. I believe that's correct. And she put this out just a few years ago. Dr. Cliff Holscher used to put this out for all livestock and poultry, and she put this out primarily for beef cattle. You can go to the bookstore and get it, but if you'll go to this, if you'll just type in your browser, in your Google or whatever you're using, beef.tamu.edu, you get to our A&M Extension beef cattle webpage. And then if you look under publications or health section, under the health section and publications, you can download this. It's about 1 megabyte, so it takes a little bit of time. It's a PDF file, but it's very, very useful, and you can look at it for a lot of different things. This is Dr. Swiger's website up here, livestock vet ento, so veterinary entomology.tamu.edu. So those are just two things I want to point out before we get started. Okay. So flies that we can have, we'll have face flies. If you got cattle up in the barn somewhere, this is what you've got around the face, and obviously we call them face flies because they are on the face. They like to drink fluids out of the nose and out of the eye. They are responsible for the transmission of pink eye. You can vaccinate for it, okay, but they do transmit it. A lot of different products that are out there, pour-ons and dewormers that are also pour-ons do not kill face flies. They do kill horn flies, but they do not kill face flies because they don't go on the animal's back, which is where the pour-on is. And so typically we have to use things. I did come across this the other day, and it's not really an ad, but it's just something to let you know. There's some stuff here for horses. So horses sometimes get face flies. Now these come in these little tubes that you see. They're about a couple of 3 or 4 cc's. Follow the directions on how you use those. They're very, very effective, not only against face flies, but against the biting flies that we're going to talk about here in a minute. The main thing about these flies is that most of these flies that we're going to talk about, like litter or manure or piles of trash and wet areas, once we get rid of those, we can really reduce the population of those flies. Here's one of what I call the 2 armored flies, because of the flies you can slap, knock them to the ground with a brick, and they basically shake themselves off and fly off again. The stable fly, and you can see them there on that animal's legs, larger than the house flies. Both of them take a blood meal. Now, the face flies don't take blood meals. They just basically lick fluids and transmit stuff, okay? They like wet areas. So this Beefmaster cat down here at the bottom, down at my old ranch, there's a creek back in there. It was always sort of wet, and you can't see, but she has a lot of those flies down here in her belly and down on her legs. They cause a real painful bite. The problem with them is that they're really hard to control, right? Because I've got to they have to be a contact spray. And unfortunately, when those cows get down there in the bottom, they don't. So the main thing is to sort of keep those flies, keep those cattle out of those areas during fly periods, like during the springtime. When it gets dry, they're generally not a problem because they're not there. They can transmit anaplasmosis. We don't really have much of that. We got a little pocket of it up around up around fowl, primarily because of ticks, but not because of these flies. Trypanosomiasis, anthrax, and equine infectious anemia. So some of these also bite horses. So just some thoughts. Here's the other armored fly that y'all are probably much more familiar with because if you have horses. The horse fly. That's a good picture of what it looks like, and you can kind of see on that bay gelding the kind of whelps that it creates. It'll bite humans as well as animal, and I can tell you, if you've ever been bitten by one of these things, you know you've been bit. But the interesting thing that's different to understand the difference in life cycle is that the males do not bite. They do not suck blood. They eat nectar. They're from California or someplace, okay? And they like flowers. They do not they don't bite, eat blood. These flies are active in the daylight, rest at night. They like wet or damp spoil areas, so they may be found in the same location as the others. They also transmit some of the same diseases that we see with the other fly. Again, these are the kind of flies that are hard to control, and the way that you sort of control them is that you clean up all these areas that they like to breed in. Now, with the exception of those products that I was just showing you earlier right here for horses, they will help you control horse flies. I used to have an old gray mare, literally, that would look like she'd been shot with a shotgun. And when I started using those products, it basically moved all those flies away from her. So here's a big one that's always a problem: the horn flies. A couple of stories here. These are my cattle. Down at the bottom, we'd sort of had a dry period. I mean, we'd had some rain, obviously, looking at all the grass that we've got there, but it had been sort of dry. And I was driving down the pasture, and I looked at that Charolais calf there with his head through the fence, and I thought, man, that calf got mud on him. I wonder where he got it from, because I thought maybe I had a leak. And then I realized that it hadn't rained and didn't have a leak, and I drove back up and realized those were horn flies. That happened within just a few days. Okay, so I really hadn't had horn flies, been controlling them, and then within just a few days of me being out of town, being gone, we had a horn fly explosion. So horn flies are not native to the United States. They actually came from Europe. A lot of our pests came from someplace else. including our fever ticks, I think. They like to reproduce in fresh manure, the horn flies do. They'll take 20 to 40 blood meals a day. They can transmit a disease called staphylococcus, and I'll show you with that, and allergic dermatitis. So this heifer up here, if you look up here, you see these spots on her. She has a big, terrible spot down here. So she has a hornfly allergy. She's a good cow, but every spring and every summer she suffers with this dermatitis. I can give her something for it, but that basically hurts her reproductively. And so, they sometimes will get animals that have this hornfly dermatitis. I've had a black heifer that had the same thing, sort of like a crusty skin on the side, and you thought she was always scratching because of lice, but it was hornfly dermatitis. A lot of different treatments out there, fortunately, for hornflies, okay? Almost everything works up to a point. So on our ranch down in Jim Wells County, we always had a lot of ticks. Fortunately, not the fever kind where I was, but a lot of Gulf Coast ticks and a lot of Lone Star ticks. And so I would use tick tags in their ears, one in each ear as recommended. I'd also be able to control horn flies. But I also used a back rubber to control horn flies. Sometimes I used a pour-on. So I used a combination of approaches. I even used insect growth regulator in a mineral. So that basically when a cow eats that insect growth regulator, it passes out in the manure. When mama hornfly lays her eggs in that manure and those eggs hatch, those larvae crawl around and they eat that manure and they eat that insect growth regulator, and it basically keeps them being teenagers. Actually, what it does, it keeps them from forming a hard shell so they never become adults. Then, of course, there's a new vet gun. I don't know if anybody's ever got one of those. It's about a $250 CO2 cartridge gun that propels some orange balls that have insecticide in them. Pretty effective, scares the hell out of the cattle, but it has put a little fun into external parasite control. Only horn flies, okay? Only external parasites. This is what staphylococcus looks like. Story on these cattle. These are some Charolais cattle at my place. Came home after being gone for a couple of days, and these 6 or 8 heifers out there were just bloody red, and they're supposed to be white and pretty. And that's what happened, is they had found some place, they had scratched themselves. These microfilarial parasites migrate to the midline in the fall, along about December, and they find something to scratch themselves on. They'd scratch themselves on some wooden feed troughs. And what it is, they're trying to get out. And it's only in the South. It's a big problem. If you've ever been in the brush country and you looked at these old Brayford type cows, these commercial cows, and they've got these big keloids, these big scar tissues underneath their belly on their navel, that's what it is. And so, that's something that's transmitted by horn flies. Fortunately, most of our pour-ons, dewormers will take care of this, but the main thing is we have to control the horn flies. So if we look at external parasite control, I'm going to wind this up, particularly for horn flies. Here's a bunch of different methods that I have here. So here we have a veterinarian that is squirting on external parasiticide for horn flies on these Brayford cows. And so, probably permethrin works very, very well. Over here, we've got a black cow that's got a insecticide ear tag. Actually, it's a tick tag, but it also kills horn flies. And then we have a mineral tub that has insecticide growth regulator, insect growth regulator, IGR or Alticid. It's a little bit more expensive, I will admit, but you can see that it was working. Since I've moved to Washington County, I haven't had as much luck with it, okay? This is a dust bag. Dust bags have been used for many, many years. The place in Washington County, when I bought it, had an old dust bag on it. Dust bags are easy to charge. The problem is you got to get them low enough for cattle to be able to get into it, but high enough that the calves don't find it. And it typically has to be someplace where cattle can kind of go through it and hit it. Down here at the bottom, this is a back rubber. Those aren't my cattle, but it's the best picture I could find. I even took some pictures of mine. I like back rubbers. I stretch them over gates. I move them around. I've got 2 or 3. They're about 12 feet in length. They're sort of hard to charge the first time. I take one of those molasses tubs. And back in the old days, we used to use burned motor oil or diesel. Do not use petroleum products. They are not labeled for cattle. I use vegetable oil, so a couple of gallons of vegetable oil. You might even want to loosen it up a little bit with some water and stir it up, get that whole thing wet, and then you charge it. There's about a 50-to-1 ratio in using the products, insecticide products, but they last a long time. And I have found an easy way to sort of recharge those without taking them down. And I mix about a gallon of product in a plastic jug and a paintbrush, and I'll go around painting those things. It takes me about 30 minutes to paint 2 of those, and that lasts for a couple of weeks, and it's very effective. Cows really like them. You got to hang them up high enough. Once again, the cows can go through them, but you got to be able to get them low enough that calves can get to them as well. Then down there at the bottom, I'm sure that the guys from Animal Health Commission and APHIS will recognize that. That's the old dipping vat that was over in Zapata County, south of Hebronville. It's gone now. But that is one way to control external parasites. Very effective, but probably a little more expensive. But my whole point is that identification is critical. You got to know what it is that you're trying to kill, and that goes for internal parasites as well as external parasites. Because some of these things that are labeled here will not kill some of the flies that we talked about. Okay. Obviously, this will not kill anything except horn flies, because horn flies are the only fly that reproduces in manure. Okay. And so it's important to identify the parasite. Fortunately, most methods of control will control more than one pest. So all these others that we see up here, with perhaps the exception of this one, but certainly the tag, the dust bag, the back rub, and I don't have an oiler roller, and certainly this will control about anything, any other external parasite. You have to sort of balance whether you need a quick knockdown versus long-term. Okay. A combination of products is best, or a combination of methods. You need to watch for resistance. We don't have hornfly resistance in South Texas. Fortunately, we do have it in the Panhandle. We do have some resistance in ticks. But again, we're talking about hornflies here. But what happens is, if you were to apply a product and you expect a good knockdown and you get it for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden about 3 or 4 days later they're back, you have hornfly resistance. And so it's important to know that. Think about cost. What does it cost to do some of these things? And then of course withdrawal times. These tags that I use up here, this spray product here, certainly has withdrawal time. So if I treat animals with that product, I have to wait until they're cleared before I can sell those animals. So with that, I know I've talked a lot. I've given you a lot of information over a lot of different topics. Oh, one last slide, sorry. You don't always have to use insecticides, okay? You may not. I've got people that choose not to use insecticides that are trying to do other systems. You might even select for animals that are a little bit more resistant, so you might keep track of the number of horn flies that are on your animals. And you might find that, hey, this cow or this bull has a lot less flies than this other one does. Okay, and so that is a natural resistance. Now, will that work? Yes. Will it take a long time? Yes, it will. Okay. Hornfly resistance, or resistance to external parasites, is not highly heritable, about 30%. Okay, but the problem is it takes a long time to get a lot of cattle that are resistant in your herd. But it doesn't mean that it can't be done. Okay. In the meantime, you can do some other things. You can use good proper pasture management. Overgrazing increases the infestation rates of a lot of external parasites, because they like litter, they like cow pies, they like bare areas, some area, like for example. All right. Rest rotation, so getting enough grass up there. getting rid of trashy areas, getting rid of manure piles, getting rid of wet areas, not grazing in wet areas, avoiding fly areas during fly season, and even prescribed fire. Okay, all those little things are sort of components. None by themselves will do it all. None of the chemical solutions that I showed you will do it all. So it sort of takes a combination. That was my last slide. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer.
All right. The chat is clear.
Okay.
Thank you,
You're
Dr.
all,
Joe. Appreciate it
yeah.
very much.
All you guys are, anybody that's on the video is always welcome to contact me. I'd really like for you to contact, you can go through your local county extension agent, but we're going to keep them in the loop one way or the other. So thank you all so very much, and I'll be interested in hearing the rest of the presentation.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Pascal.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
With that, one other quick thing, just keep an eye out for your email participants. We're going to send you a survey questionnaire, customer satisfaction type survey after the program, if you don't mind filling that out and returning it back to us. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Vidal Signs over there in Hidalgo County.
Good morning. Our next speaker is Dr. Muzaffar Magdumi. He's a Laredo Regional Director for the Texas Animal Health Commission, and his talk is going to be an update on the fever ticks in the Rio Grande Valley. Dr. Magdumi?
Yes, sir. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. And so let me share my screen and the presentation. 1 second. All right. Can you all see the presentation now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Come on.
Hey.
Yes, sir, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Well, again, thank you for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure to be here today talking to you all. And I have with me here my supervising inspector for the region, Mr. Bart Stockbridge. And so we decided to give you an update here regarding the fever tick situation, what we're going through currently, and so the purpose of this talk is to basically give you a background of what fever ticks are essentially, and what they do, and what impacts they have on cattle, and current updates on the quarantines, etc. And then we'll sort of try to merge it with how fever ticks can impact your beef cattle production. Do you see my camera or not? Just before I proceed.
Yes,
Can you all see me now?
yes.
All right. Well, it's good to put face to the name. So all right. So slide number. So I'll go by slide number. All right. Okay. Brilliant. So what are cattle fever ticks? So cattle fever tick, known as, basically call them Rhipicephalus or Bauphilus ticks. This is a scientific name. There's two types, Rhipicephalus annulatus and Rhipicephalus microplis, and they are a huge threat to the United States cattle industry. These ticks are capable of carrying the protozoa or a microscopic parasite. We call it Babesia. There's again two types, Babesia bovis and Babesia bigemina. They cause babesiosis in cattle, and that also is known as cattle fever. So that's why the name cattle fever tick, because it causes cattle fever. So Bauphilus ticks, these were first introduced in eastern Mexico on livestock, brought to the New World by Spanish colonists. And so in the region here in Laredo, we see south of Laredo to Brownsville, we get a more tropical cattle fever tick, which is basically Rhipicephalus microplis. And further north of Laredo up to Del Rio, there's more, another type of tick called Rhipicephalus annulatus. As I said, it harbors, Babesia. It's a protozoa leading to babesiosis. And the main sort of, what the symptoms are, it breaks the red blood cells and leads to high fever and large spleen, blood in the urine. Typically, you'll see weakness and depression in cattle. They have difficulty breathing and they exhibit cough. Because of the breakdown of the RBC, it certainly leads to anemia, and you'll see yellowing mucous membranes and fat. It's mostly fatal in most cases, as typically naive cattle do exhibit these symptoms and they die because they do not have any immunity to babesiosis. So, what are the potential hosts for cattle fever tick? So basically talking here about what the host is, so it's an animal that a cattle fever tick can get on as a larvae or a seed tick. It can attach and be able to complete its life cycle and develop into an adult and drop off, lay eggs, and start a new generation of fever ticks. So not everything is a suitable host. So people, dog, feral swine, etc., are not going to contribute to the spread of fever ticks or establishment of the new infestation and maintenance of and perpetuation of the existing infestation. For example, if we talk about the suitable hosts, these are cattle, of course, horses, white-tailed deer, nilgai antelope, and red deer. Cattle are the predominant number one host for the fever ticks. Horses, certainly they can get fever ticks, but not as much as cattle. With the white-tailed deer and nilgai, these are wildlife hosts. And because of their, talking about the white-tailed deer, for example, because of the smaller frame and the hair cord being pretty, soft, the fever ticks find it conducive to attach and actually complete the life cycle on those wildlife hosts as well. The biggest challenge with these wildlife hosts are that they travel longer distances. They move from one place to the other. And approximately, we've seen the distance covered by nilgai and white-tailed deer is approximately, 3 to 5 miles, depending on what species we're talking about. And so these fever ticks can be spread from if the infestation is discovered, for example, here in Laredo, we're looking at about approximately 5 miles if you have a wildlife component associated to see how these, regarding the spread. So there's been a huge concern with respect to the whitetail and nilgai here in the region. I put this slide here, we call it a dangerous equation. So if you consider a situation where you have native cattle, native to the United States with no immunity to babesiosis or no prior exposure to babesiosis. And now if the fever ticks, because they have the capability of harboring the protozoa babesia, so imagine this fever tick with babesiosis trying to get on cattle as a larvae and then completing all the life cycle on the cattle. So there is possibility that this babesia organism, when that fever tick gets a blood meal, it's transmitted into the bloodstream of cattle and causing an outbreak of babesiosis. Alternatively, so when you see native cattle with fever ticks but without babesia, so there's no outbreaks associated. That's currently, what we have in our Laredo region here. The fever ticks we have in our region, they are lacking this one component, babesiosis. That's why we don't see any outbreaks of babesiosis here, and that's why major concern for us is fever ticks, because they have the capability of actually harboring that babesiosis. Back in the years, approximately 100 years ago, there was an outbreak of babesiosis in the state of Texas, and it led to approximately 95% of the deaths in Texas livestock. So it's a huge threat. Again, it's a big problem. It's been going on for hundreds of years, and Texas Animal Health Commission and USDA are working in partnership with each other to combat the issue of fever ticks and address this the concern, address the issue effectively. So how do we eradicate fever ticks? Let me give you a little bit of a background about the life cycle of this tick. So as I said earlier, it's a one-host tick. So it completes all the life cycle on one host. Basically, if it gets as a larvae, the steps are, when a fever tick is, an engorged female, let me put it this way, an engorged female is laid on the ground. It lays eggs. Those eggs hatch into a larvae, and larvae start climbing onto the cattle and attach. And when those larvae attach, they convert to another step in the life cycle is basically transfer to the nymph. So when they are converted to the nymph, that nymph molts to adults, and that adult is then basically an engorged female that gets a blood meal and drops off. And when those adult engorged females are dropped off, they lay approximately 4,400 eggs, and it start a whole new generation of fever ticks from there. As soon as the adult engorged female drops off, after it lays eggs, it dies off. So it's not capable, after it lays the eggs, it's not capable of transmitting. That's completes its life cycle and it dies. Then you start a whole new infestation, whole new life cycle with those eggs there. So females lay up to 44,000 eggs, as I mentioned. This slide exactly enumerated. This is a picture from a book. Actually, I really like this slide because it talks about some of the important parameters in the life cycle of this fever tick. And the reason I put it there, because all our treatment modalities, the way we establish our program, what we do here in terms of the treatment and quarantine durations, et cetera, are basically revolving around this slide, are basically revolving around the numbers and the timeline, that's outlined in this slide. So female, as I mentioned, it lays approximately 4,400 eggs. The pre-oviposition period, which is basically 2 to 39 days, what it means, she may take up to 39 days before she decides to lay eggs, that female, engorged female. Oviposition period is between 4 to 44 days. So she may take up to 4 to 44 days to complete actually laying eggs in that situation. So the average time from the time that the larvae crawls onto a cow to go through, become an adult, drop off and lay eggs is essentially 18 to 37 days. And on an average, as 25 days, they can do as quickly as 18 days. So between 18 to 25 is basically an average timeline for completion of the life cycle. So that's our best shot to kill the fever tick when it's on the cattle. So engorged females, they're ready to drop off. Each tick can drop off at different times and at different locations in the pasture and distribute ticks all over the premises. So each tick can lay, like I said, 4,400 eggs. So it's important to remember when you are performing, when you're rotating cattle in between pastures, you can see how it can spread fairly, rapidly. So as an engorged female tick drops off, she's going to lay eggs. So these eggs are laid in clusters. We call it as an egg mass. And after she completes laying eggs, she's now going to die. But now there's a whole new generation of ticks that come on. So for the egg mass to survive, it's important that egg mass stays together. That's what we call as a microenvironment. So eggs are susceptible to desiccation and extreme temperatures. If it's extremely hot or cold, it may do some damage to the outside of that egg mass, but it's still, the inside of that egg mass is still intact. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you exactly how that egg mass is actually looking like. So look at this picture on the right side. This is an engorged female fever tick. It has laid the eggs. It's about 44,000 approximately, that amount there. And outside of, like I said before, outside of these this microenvironment, this egg mass is prone to desiccation and hot temperature, but inside of that egg mass is still capable of basically developing into completely new infestations and completely new ticks there. On the left hand side, if you see this image where you see the side of a cow, these are all fever ticks that you can see. So this is heavily infested cow with Rhipicephalus, Boophilus fever ticks. So moving on to some of the treatment options we have available for fever ticks here. As you see from the slide, you can see on the left side, that's a spray box. It essentially utilizes a chemical called coumaphos. So we call it Coral. The active ingredient is coumaphos, and that's actually responsible for killing ticks on contact. Moving on to some injectable options, we have doramectin, and thanks to the USDA and coming up with this drug for treatment of fever ticks, it's given every 28 days, 25 to 28 days to kill fever ticks. On the right-hand side, you see dipping vat. This is, again, the same chemical that's used in spray boxes. And it's basically coumaphos used in dipping vat. So cattle are dipped, so they go through the swim vat, and all the body parts are exposed to coumaphos. Essentially, what that's doing is getting ticks in contact with coumaphos and essentially making them, basically killing them. And at the same, as I said, it's a contact death. So when cattle are exposed to coumaphos, they die immediately. The fever ticks die immediately. We have not had any concerns of any issues with coumaphos. Again, if the concentration, it's maintained at a suitable concentration. If the concentration of coumaphos in the dipping vat exceeds the requirement, certainly there's going to be toxic event. And but we try to effectively manage and monitor those concentrations in our dipping vat and spray boxes to make sure that we stay within an adequate or acceptable levels so that it doesn't cause any issues, respiratory issues, or deaths in cattle. So on the image below, you see our the folks staff with USDA and Texas Animal Health Commission are scratching cattle. So essentially, when cattle come for dipping at the dipping vat, they are our team. What they do, they inspect cattle. So essentially, you scratch cattle for fever ticks. If we do not identify any fever ticks, or if we identify either way, the cattle are going to go through, after this process, they go through the dipping process. And so after they come out of the dipping vat, there's a drip pen. So all that coral coumaphos is, once it's all dried out, the cattle are ready to move. Moving on to what treatment options we do have for wildlife animals here in the region. We use ivermectin treated corn. So there's no drug injectable medications that are approved for use in white-tailed deer or nilgai. And also it's a challenge to actually treat these animals based on the distance they travel and based on the limitations we have in restraining these animals. So USDA came up with a treatment option. Basically, this ivermectin is impregnated in corn, and we feed corn in wildlife during the corn season, which starts February, March until July 31st. There's a 60-day withdrawal period for the corn. So we withdraw all our ivermectin treated corn at the end of July so that we allow 60 days for the upcoming hunting season. Now that hunting season is around the corner, we have already stopped feeding ivermectin treated corn, and we are getting ready for the upcoming hunting season. It would be a concern if we were to feed corn throughout the 60-day period prior to the hunting season, because if those ivermectin residues are identified in the meat or identified in any of those wildlife that are hunted, it will be a big concern with respect to the FDA and USDA and TAHC. So we ensure that the corn is stopped by the end of the hunting, the corn season, July 31st. So that's essentially, the picture you look, that's a corn feeder right here, and we try to make an enclosure so that there's non-target species are prevented from getting into the corn feeders and actually consuming that corn. This is specifically meant for wildlife. As I mentioned, doramectin earlier on, this treatment option has been proved, it's been effective against fever ticks. It, again, also relieves the stress of gathering cattle every 14 days. So I must say that with the coral, the treatment options are, we dip cattle every 7 to 14 days based on the life cycle of the tick. And so thanks to the USDA, they came up with an option of the 28-day the interval, so that reduces 50% of the stress, and 50% of the times we have to gather cattle. So you only gather cattle every once a month, and not every twice a month that was used prior. But again, producers have the option. These are both are approved methods. Producers have the option to either choose Dectomax or Goral. Both are approved methods for treatment of fever tick. Moving on, what we have in addition to our injectable and injectable drugs and of course Goral, there's a vaccine called BM86. It's an immunomodulator. This is a vaccine that was developed by the USDA ARS, and it's currently being produced by Zoetis. So in the vaccine, the USDA ARS actually targeted the BM86. It's a midgut protein. So for us to be able to effectively address the fever tick issue with respect to the vaccine, you have to have an immunoprotective antigen. So that's basically we call it a virulence factor. So research and development have shown that BM86 is an effective antigen to combat fever ticks, to actually prevent fever ticks from thriving. Research and development has also shown that this vaccine is 99% efficacious against Boophilus, Rhipicephalus, Boophilus annulatus. So that's the tick, what we see further north of Laredo up in Del Rio area. But it's only 45% efficacious against the other type of tick, which is more tropical tick called Boophilus microplus. And in our region here down in Cameron County, Willacy County, Hidalgo, and up to Laredo South, up to Del Rio, we do see this tropical kind of tropical tick Boophilus microplus. Unfortunately, the vaccine is only 45% efficacious. However, I'll have to say there's ongoing research with Texas A&M College of Veterinary Medicine. There's a new vaccine that was developed in Cuba that's called a P0 vaccine that actually targets a conserved sequence that targets a region on the chromosome, essentially that's similar between both strains, Boophilus annulatus and Boophilus microplus. So that work is under progress, and once that vaccine is produced and available in the market, we will be able to combat, or we'll be able to address the issue of 90% versus 45% efficacy among these two strains. So we'll keep our fingers crossed to have that vaccine available to us soon. But again, research, USDA, again, thanks to them, they're doing huge amount of research in coming up with new modalities for treatment of fever ticks. As I said earlier, it's a midgut protein. So what this vaccine does is it damages the midgut of this tick and makes it incapable of laying eggs. So essentially, the vaccine doesn't enable fever ticks to lay any eggs. So the way that the strategy for the vaccination in cattle, you give a dose at day 0, and there's a second dose of vaccine that's required 4 to 6 weeks. And after that, we vaccinate animals with BM86 every 6 months. So if you're starting a new herd on a vaccine protocol, we have to have initial dose given at day 0, and then 4 weeks later, we give another dose, and then you maintain it on a 6-monthly schedule. Again, we have seen in Cameron and Willacy County, there's been ranches that we use the vaccine on. Vaccine cannot be given separately. It has to be given in combination with Dectomax or Goral to have a cumulative effect and to have an effect. Again, it's not 100% efficacious against the microplus tick, so we like to give it in combination with other treatment modalities, so to get the best effect. There's a 60-day withdrawal period, as we seen in corn. There's exactly a 60-day withdrawal period for the vaccine. So if animals that are vaccinated, if they need to go to slaughter, they have to be hold off any treatment at least 60 days prior to going to slaughter. All right, so what are our management options for wildlife? As I said earlier, we provide ivermectin treated corn to deer. So certainly establishing movement barriers like high fences to prevent movement of wildlife from one place to the other is certainly known to be an effective option to prevent fever tick spreading. we do have also population management control options here. So we essentially what we do in Nilgai, and this is more applicable to Nilgai. So in Cameron County on Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge, to us, it's considered as a hotspot for fever ticks. You know, fever ticks have been there for a long time, and it's hard to, based on the mission the U.S. Fish and Wildlife have for, because it's a refuge. So unfortunately, we can't implement all our treatments on wildlife there. But what we do with wildlife on refuge, we try to manage them by reducing the population of those the nilgai. So last year, beginning October through January of actually March of this year, we did perform a few nilgai harvests there. So you can see on the left-hand side of the picture, you see a sharpshooter in a helicopter, and it says it's a nilgai here. You can see on the ground, and that's the way we do it. And there's a there's a lot of folks involved. There's USDA involved, and Texas Animal Health Commission involved in reducing the population. And it's an approved method. If you look at scientific literature and other diseases that are difficult to combat, population reduction is the way to address these issues. So we're trying every modality in the region: population reduction to injectable treatment, to preventing high fences to prevent movement of wildlife to different areas in order to prevent the spread of fever ticks in the. All right, so this map here, I want to give you an update of where we are with respect to the fever ticks in Laredo region. If you look at the circle, can you see my pointer? Can you see the mouse pointing towards the circle up top?
Yes.
Okay, so on the right-hand side, let's move on to the right-hand side where you see all this red close to the Gulf of Mexico. These are the infested premises. So it's essentially the wildlife refuge and some big ranches in Willacy County. We have our major stakeholders that have been under quarantine for a few years now. As I mentioned earlier, there's movement of wildlife is a major concern, and that's how we have noticed the fever ticks have spread from Cameron County to Willacy County due to the movement of wildlife. If you look at this little patch here where my mouse is pointing, this is Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge Unit 4, and it's surrounded on the south side. It's there's river arroyos flowing, and on the north side of that we have our major stakeholder. One of the I won't take the name of the premises, but that's the big farm, big ranch there that's under quarantine. As I mentioned earlier, back in October last year through through to March of this year, on this unit where the mouse is pointing, this is the location where we found fever ticks. And what in March, actually, there were 50 nilgai were harvested, and out of those, approximately 33 of them were infested with fever ticks. So it's a heavy load of fever ticks was identified on properties, on refuge property. And there is actually currently, there are no high fences separating Willacy County from the Cameron County. There's only arroyos, River Arroyo, in between the two counties. And we have seen from our experience, nilgai and especially nilgai are able to swim easily and move to different premises there. And what we are trying to do right now, currently, we're in the process of establishing a high fence to separate Willacy County premises from Cameron County premises to essentially reduce the load of fever ticks going further north. If you look at the circle right here on the west of where it says Willacy, and west of that, this is a new circle that we established actually 3 to 4 weeks ago. When I say the circle, what it means is essentially it's a control purpose quarantine area. So what happens is when a new infestation is identified on a ranch, what we do is we establish a 2 to 3 mile circle. Basically, anything within that 2 to 3 mile circle stays under quarantine for a stipulated period of time. In Raymondville area, we established a 3 mile circle because of the evidence of wildlife traffic So when wildlife component is involved, the circle has to be 3 miles. And if there is no wildlife involvement, then we can reduce the circle to 2 miles. If you look at this top triangle, like blue shaded area here, that's the lower Rio Grande Valley Refuge. And part of that lower Rio Grande Valley Refuge is under quarantine currently. There is the lower Rio Grande Valley Refuge do conduct the hunting on the East Lake. We call it East Lake, and the hunts start November through to March. This time of the year, we are in the process currently working with the Refuge Lower Rio Grande Valley Refuge Management to establish a standard unit permit to allow our folks go in and scratch and treat those hides that come out of those wildlife. So it's again a surveillance method for us to be able to detect if there are fever ticks in that area or not. We're hoping that there's no fever ticks up there, but other than the infested premises, that was the index premise in this Raymondville CPQA. So far, we have not been able to identify fever ticks within the 3 mile circle. So the way the circle that we work the circle up is all the premises within this area remain under quarantine for approximately from the day the infestation is found up to 15 months, 15 to 16 months. That's the maximum time point that that the premises will stay under quarantine. After that, if everything goes as per the book, as per the protocol, then that premise will be released. Going back to the life cycle, when I mentioned earlier, the ticks, when they're out in the environment, they can survive up to 9 months. That's the purpose of having infested quarantine, up to 9 months. And after that, that quarantine is converted to a check quarantine. What it essentially means, when animals are under quarantine or premises is under quarantine, all livestock on that premises is treated for 9 months. But it's up to the producer to determine whether they want to go through via the Coumaphos treatment route, or they want to opt for the Dectomax, which is every 28 days. So our folks go out there, they treat animals for 9 months for every 28 days to control fever ticks. Because I want to mention this thing here. It's important for y'all to understand. Fever tick is not an animal issue. It's an environmental problem. So what we do is we use animals, so cattle, as a method to mop up ticks from the environment. So when fever ticks are laid, this engorged female is laid out there on the pasture, it's capable of laying eggs. Now this cattle walks, and these larvae climb on the cow, and then it completes its life cycle on a cow. So as I said earlier, the best way to kill fever ticks is when it's on cattle. So we treat cattle to be able to treat fever ticks in the environment. So going back to the quarantine, again, for 9 months, we treat cattle for every 28 days. And after that, when we have completed the treatment for 9 months, this quarantine is changed to the check. What it essentially means that there will be no treatment on a check premises. However, the animals will stay under quarantine for 6 months. So we use cattle as sentinels. Now, since we have treated them, now we want to use these cattle as sentinels to see if they can mop up ticks or if there are any further ticks. Because if there are ticks, they will climb up. We will be able to notice them and actually identify them on these cattle. So our folks go out there, inspectors are out there in the field, and they so on the check premises, we conduct inspections every 90 days. So that's our schedule for inspections. If for those 6 months fever ticks are not identified on the check premises, after the completion of that check quarantine period, the premise is released from the quarantine. So currently, going back to the Raymondville circle, we did identify approximately 4 weeks ago at a routine dipping at Willamar Vat. So Texas Animal Health Commission has a vat. We own a vat, and that's placed in Willamar and Willacy County. We have an office there as well. So if you are around the area and you want to have your cattle dipped, please feel free to contact us, and we'll be happy to schedule dipping for you there at the Willamar. So we did identify approximately 4 weeks ago cattle at routine scratch inspections. These cattle were purchased through the Edinburgh livestock market from a producer who live in the Raymondville area. So when we traced these cattle back where they came from, it was basically one of the producers in Raymondville area that that was infested with fever ticks. And as a result of that, we established the 3 mile circle. If you look at the going further, so below this orange circle that's about here, there's also another circle that my cursor, the mouse is pointing to. This is also the same deal. Back in April, there were fever ticks were identified through the livestock. Edinburgh, these were purchased through one of the livestock markets, and it goes back to a producer in Sebastian area. So it's just off of Highway 77. As a result of that, we were able to start off with a 2 mile circle there and quarantine everything, all the premises with livestock within that 2 mile circle. What we have done so far, we have been able to perform all the scratch inspections, and we did not identify any other fever ticks within the circle other than the infestation we noted. And as a result, what happens is we made a decision that we would abbreviate the CPQA to only include a ring of adjacent premises and the ring of check premises throughout. They will stay under quarantine for approximately 15 to 16 months. If you look at further west, there's my mouse is pointing towards the Hidalgo County circle now. Again, these are the traces from the circles established in Cameron County. So I'll go to the traces after this slide, but just to give you an idea where these infestations how these infestations got established in Hidalgo County is essentially the cattle were sold from an infested premises, and a premise in Hidalgo County purchased those cattle, and as a result of that, fever ticks got spread. And now there's a circle, 2 mile circle up there in Hidalgo County. So that's sort of a background, about where we started, what we have currently under quarantine, and what our folks are managing in the region. So moving on to the traces, cattle fever tick trace investigation. Because of the life cycle that fever tick can spread, survive for about 9 months without a blood meal on the pasture, we go back from the day the infestation is identified on the pasture, we go back a year to include anything that the producer brought or sold within that year. So what we do is our approach is we contact the livestock market and get all the information with respect to the buyer sheets, seller sheets and buyer sheets and drive-ins pertaining to that particular producer. And following from there, once we have that information, we go back and perform our traces, assign traces to different regions. Sometimes, in Cameron County, for example, the premises that's infested, the owner purchased 100 head or sold 200 head. So essentially what that means, those 200 head are 200 new traces. So we assign each animal a trace number. It gets assigned to the region, to the premises of destination, and we start off from there. What we do is for trace outs, because those are the major concerns. We know these animals, what we call as trace outs, these animals came out of an infested premises. And now it's a high risk trace. It's a high risk cattle, and those cattle are capable of spreading fever ticks to another premises. As a result of that, what we do is we quarantine those trace outs. We issue an exposed quarantine, which essentially means these are exposed, but we haven't been able to identify fever ticks on those until our staff goes out there, our inspectors go out there, they scratch those cattle. If they do not identify fever ticks, we still keep that premises under an exposed quarantine, which essentially means we got to treat those cattle for 9 months and then convert them to a check for 6 months. Sometimes it's the decision that the regional management, along with the epidemiologist, the state epidemiologist, and the field epidemiologist, we make to determine if it's a highly low risk area or there's low risk of transmission of fever ticks due to wildlife. We sometimes do make a decision to convert the exposed premise to a check premises. What that means is, rather than going every 28 days treating cattle on those premises, we go every 90 days to see until we identify fever ticks on that premises. If we do not identify, the premise is going to be only under quarantine for 6 months, and after that it will be released. It gets released. So same with the trace-ins. Trace-ins are typically considered as low risk. because it basically tells us if the infestation is discovered on premise X. Trace in is where did this producer purchase this? Where did this cattle came from? Did they originate from the premises that's infested, or did he purchase it from a different premises that had fever ticks? So we go back and actually scratch those animals to contact these premises and get those animals scratched for fever ticks. So some of the eradication of fever ticks on infested premises, as I mentioned earlier, we have the life cycle is completed. These are some of the summary points here. Within 18 to 37 days, on an average, it takes about 25 days to complete the life cycle. The unfed larvae, they can survive up to 9 months in the environment. That's why our quarantine stays for 9 months. So we want to ensure that all these fever ticks that are present in the environment, they are treated, or after 9 months, they will eventually die. Cattle recommendation is to dip cattle every 14 days for 9 months with Coumaphos, or have actually treated them with Dectomax for every 28 days. The good thing is that Coumaphos has no slaughter withdrawal. It's a contact death, so anytime cattle are dipped, they can right away go to sale or to slaughter, whatever the producer wants to do from there. Now, this one slide, I want to merge it with how fever tick issue can be a big problem with respect to your beef production operation. Again, the best practices are, if you identify as a producer, you're raising a flock, it's your responsibility to contact, to ensure that your cattle are healthy, the management, the treatment, herds have their own management protocol for treatment, or contact your local veterinarian to see if you identify any ticks, not necessarily fever ticks, any ticks on cattle should be brought to the attention of your veterinarian, or have a treatment management protocols in place so that you do not encounter the issue of these ticks. The big problem with these ticks is they are blood-sucking parasite. It's going to impact your livestock anyway, and in terms of, if your cattle are anemic, their feed to, overall their general health is depressed. The feed to meat conversion ratio declines, and the conception risks and associated parameters there are also reduced. So it's a huge problem. Again, like I said earlier, it's a huge threat to the cattle industry. But also we take pride in what we do, but it's also the responsibility of producers to assist us in this process and to help us to combat this issue and address this issue effectively. If you notice ticks, you always have an opportunity, whether it's a fever tick or not. It's a voluntary dip. You can always contact us, contact USDA, contact Texas Animal Health Commission folks, and we'll be able to schedule a dipping for you. As I said, dips, Coumaphos does not have any slaughter withdrawal, so you should be able to move your cattle effectively, and at least you'll have a peace of mind that if there are fever ticks on cattle, those are effectively killed. And so I think, in my opinion, that certainly will help you all to stay away from fever ticks. And I hope by now it's a whole new ordeal, and it's a big problem. And if you all get into the fever tick issue, if your cattle are identified for fever ticks, these premises, and you all will have to be under quarantine for approximately 15 to 16 months. One thing I do want to highlight here, I get this question asked a lot of times, that Edinburgh livestock is the source of fever ticks. So when we go to these infested premises, or the premises that are under quarantine because they fall within a 2-mile circle, I get frequently folks say, oh, well, yeah, these ticks came from Edinburgh livestock. I want to take a moment to address that thing here. It's not the market that's the source of fever ticks. Unfortunately, fever ticks come with cattle from a different premises, and they are sold at the market. They stay at the market maximum for a day or two. They go through and merging, thinking back about how this life cycle works. As I said earlier, when fever tick drops off of cattle, at that point of time, it's not able to strive. It dies off. So there's no way a female fever tick drops off and it now climbs onto another cattle. So there's no way a market can be a source of infestation. Again, for fever ticks to strive, you have to have a pasture there for them to lay eggs, and those eggs actually hatch to larvae, and they climb those grass tips. And when cattle moves through that pasture, when the larvae are literally waiting for that cattle, they have these sensors. Actually, they sense that animal is actually coming their way, and they are ready to climb. Those are not the pasture situation is different than what we see at the markets. So just wanted to bring it up, and so that you all at least we all think thoroughly about this issue, and if you have any concerns about the markets, we can at least effectively address them. So market definitely is not a source. They do come from pasture. They come to the market with fever ticks, if at all we identify them at the market. The other best practice I would definitely recommend, if you are within the quarantine area, or whether it's a free area or the systematic zone, which is along the river, we would highly recommend you to restrict movement of livestock from if you're in infested premises without any treatment. And what it does is it doesn't do any good to anybody. It actually jeopardizes the whole problem, and fever, you essentially spread fever ticks to different premises. It's always good to contact, if you have any suspicion of any ticks, contact your local vet, contact a USDA or Texas Animal Health Commission. We will be more than glad to help you to go out there and spray your cattle with Coumaphos, or have them dipped, so that just you get a peace of mind that you're not part of this spread. With that, I think I'm going to open it up for questions. Thank you. That's all I have for you today, but I'm willing to answer any questions you may have for me.
Any questions for Dr. McDoomey?
Okay, I guess not. We'd like to thank Dr. McDoomey and Mr. Bart Stockbridge over with the Texas Animal Health Commission in Laredo. Thank you for taking the time to present today. Very good information. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate it very much. And we'd like to thank again Dr. Pascal over in Corpus, our livestock specialist, for presenting this morning. Last thing again is we will be giving out one CEU for this program. So hopefully those that need the CEUs submitted their license number. If not, please go ahead and email it to us at the Hidalgo, Cameron, Willacy, or Starr County office. And again, please keep an eye out for an email with an evaluation for today's program. Please fill that out and email it back to us if you can. But if there's no questions, I guess that'll conclude our program for today. And thank you all again for attending. And keep a watch out for your emails for future programs that we'll be conducting. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.